Hi, everyone. I think our theme tonight is sad poems, so we should all settle in. I thank you to Marcia and Phil for inviting me to read in this beautiful space. And I am new to Ventura, and I've been exploring Oxnard and the area, and I'm thrilled that there's such a vibrant literary scene here, and I'm honored that I've been welcomed into it. And I know many of you were expecting Veronica, and she sadly has the flu. She's a fabulous poet and reader, so I just wanted to give her a shout out and acknowledge her, and that we're sending her some healing wishes for a speedy recovery. I'll be reading some poems from my book, The Silence of Doorways, as well as some poems that have been written since its publication. And there's sort of a theme, a loose theme, that is based on a podcast I've been listening to with W.S. Merwin, or I was listening to a few days ago, and he talks about a group of linguists who believe that the primordial impulse for language was based on grief, and that the sound is a long vowel sound, and that needed language. And I've been thinking one could argue that love has the same sort of demand for expression. And so Merwin takes it further and talks about poetry as having that same impulse to express what words can't, which is, of course, paradoxical, but I think very true, and sort of the essence of metaphor. And so thinking about all of that, I've put together, thinking about origins, there's a few mother poems, and all of the poems I'll read, except one or two, have water in them, in all different capacities. But for me, the ocean has that same sort of primordial feel. I like to kayak out on the open ocean, and just that feeling of being out there has sort of that need for expression that I hear in when Merwin was describing poetry. So that's sort of a loose theme for all the poems tonight. So I will start with Mother. And this is based on sort of all different poets who have poems about mothers. So there's a Ted, which is Ted Kooser, and Mary, which is Mary Oliver. Mother. Every poem about a mother is its own sorrow, its own white iris looking out at the world. Ted's geese resting in the pond, peonies burning circles in the sky. Mary's mother is blue wisteria. A mossy stream behind her house brings order to the world. She tells us to live with the beetle and the wind, to let life untidy us. My mother doesn't like to be in nature, but she took great care of her plants, knew their language, smoothed the dark veins of their leaves. Her poem will not contain flowers, no wisteria, no iris delivered from the house of the dead. I'll call it Poem with its head in its hands, and there will be an artichoke, its thirsty shape urging us to unbrace its layered heart. Her husband will call it Be the flame, renew my thirst. Her son will call it The darkness is not here to stay. All right, I might flip back and forth between the book and this. How's that? That's so loud up here. Okay. Is this okay?
Yeah.
All right. Returning number 2. There's a poem in this book called Returning. When my mother flew from the nest, everything was an empty mouth. My stomach, nothing but wind and sky. My teenage body, like driftwood, washed ashore into the arms of strangers. I wanted them wholly, wanted them distant, wanted them floating on the shoreline like a black box detailing the scenes of my disaster. For years, it was my job to pour alcohol into the empty cups of men. I watched cobwebs gather in their hair. Now I watch for a flame of wings in the backyard of my childhood home. Remember the place I dreamed away from. The empty glass I held out to the world. A woman in the kitchen is sewing grief into an empty mouth, an equation that will never work itself out. There's a certainty only the body knows, the way a swallow builds its nest of saliva and mud, a genetic map flapping in the brain. This house is not a map. It is the shadow of a girl who woke up with the world opening inside her like an unnameable star. The endangered world spinning on its axis, listening for the flap, flap, flap of leaving. This house is made of tripwire. Here, let me show you. So these are moving sort of away from the mother theme and more into the water theme. Poem for a dying philodendron. You sit outside my apartment door, limp. The woman across the hall turns her head away. Your thirsty stem lowers the value of her blooming, the deep green vibrancy at her doorstep. You sing your own water song. Remind me of a photograph I once saw. Old woman wearing vegetation on her head. Every drop of water has its own story to tell. A million microcosms in the palm of my hand. If I hold a cup of water to the sky, it tells the story of the world, knows what drifts out, returns again. My neighbor knows just what level of tenderness to administer, but she ignores you like I do, pretends you are not hers to love. So this next one is about the experience of going out on the water in a kayak, and it's kind of that moment when you sort of leave land and you're out there in the middle of the vastness. I don't go very far, especially if I'm alone, but there is something quite unique about that moment when you kind of look back and see the land. It's called drift. This is where we part. This is where I go when I want things to be quiet. The kind of distance only the sea understands as it empties into the sky. Past the breakwater, paddling into the endlessness, the elsewhere, a blue drift of a bird. As a girl, I'd hold myself underwater until my body, with gasp and flail, fought back. It felt good knowing my body wanted to live. 230,000 species in the ocean, so close I can feel their breathing like an ecosystem in my bones. Out here, it's so open, there's nowhere to disappear. So this is taking water in a very different direction. These next two poems I'm going to read just directly one into the other. They are about waterboarding and Abu Ghraib, and this first one was written the day after Osama bin Laden was killed. I think I need to, it's the need to see and Water asks a question. In the streets, they're dancing for the dead. I mean the killing. They're killing for the dead, but there will still be water and throat and hose, dead eyes and photographs to shame the living. We arrive, sandbags over our heads, beat naked, kneel and squat and click and click. O sky, O chain, O clothes beat broken. Hang me to the door, open my mouth to not speak. Abu Ghraib. 3 a.m., soldier, my bedroom, my children, my head, my hands heard screaming. Next, a cage, a tent. 1 month and just before sunset, flooded with water and waste. Cut our hearts under his tongue, body away. Lost hearing, lost consciousness, lost mind. Sometimes spark, sometimes spread, sometimes click, sometimes water, sometimes drown. They said pose, they said smile, they said sing. Rope wrist, rope pipe, rope hours. Did you, do you recognize this fist? So going in yet another direction. These next two poems are kind of have a Buddhist leaning, but also a talking back to in a way. This next one in particular is about my nephew who was living in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand for a number of months, and he sent an email to me that was very self-critical about reaching for the food that he liked, that brought pleasure, rather than just simply reaching for the food that was about nutrients. And he was very self-critical about this, and I think he had only been there a few weeks. So my response was to write this poem. It's called Disquietude. I think this was the one in Spillway, actually. For 2 months, I've been living with monks. No longer dizzy from the circle of worry, I see truth in the order of things. Eat for the body, not the senses. Still, I crave the sky in my mouth, feel Kerouac's fabulous Roman candles explode like spiders beneath my skin. Daydream of curry and spice. Make poems in my head about the wild dishevelment of being, that fierce blue drowning. Of the 10 defilements, passion is the one I can't shake. In a month, I'll step out of the forest, carry my longing home again. And this is in praise of attachment. Sometimes night is so quiet, we don't notice the fading light. And during the eclipse, the gradual darkness felt familiar, even at noon. We moved through the dark with all our flickering distractions, as if evening had fallen and we had already lived the day. You tell me mindfulness is the path to non-attachment, noticing the sky as it passes through all its shades of impermanence, never quite exactly the same again. and being present when love inhabits you, listening as it thrashes against the dark with all its grace and fear and mercy. Tell me, who wouldn't cling to the moment when the sky opens its hands like a prayer, and to this life as it begins to resemble the last bit of sun uneclipsed by the moon? And who wouldn't want to love once more and then again? So I thought I would end with a short, slightly more hopeful poem. Only slightly. Let's see. This is called Still Life. So this book is actually, it's arranged like a photography exhibit. So the sections are portraits, landscapes, overexposures, and so a lot of the poems in here have photography references. And this one, that's just simply in the title, Still Life. After the rain stops, birds flood the courtyard, swooping the air with what seems like joy. We watch through the kitchen window, a bowl of curried vegetables on the table. The air outside pulses with pleasure. It's hard to say what makes us happiest: the food, the wings that open without fear, or the rest of our life that flies in and in and in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. That was wonderful.